In the shadow of the arsenal of democracy, where the heartbeat of America was forged in iron and sweat, there lived a man who didn't build machines. He felt them. Corporal Raymond Cole, 26 years old, straight out of the junkyards of Detroit. They called him Grease Hands, not out of affection, but because his palms never washed clean. Oil was his ink, engines his scripture. Born to a father who scrapped Fords for a living, and a mother who mended socks with the same stubborn thread, Ray Cole grew up believing that nothing was broken, beyond breathing, if you knew where to listen. Detroit in '42 was a symphony of urgency. Factories that once birthed luxury sedans now birthed monsters of war. The M4 Sherman tank, America's armored workhorse. 5,000 pounds of riveted steel, a 75mm gun that could punch through a wall at 1,000 yards, and a Wright Continental R975 radial engine that purred like a caged lion. On paper, it was a marvel. Reliable, mass-producible, the tank that would roll over Hitler's Atlantic Wall like a steamroller over gravel. But Ray Cole, fresh off the assembly line himself, saw the lie in the blueprints. He saw the hesitation baked into every weld. Ray hadn't enlisted. The draft had yanked him from the shadows of Highland Park, where he'd raced souped-up hot rods down abandoned rail spurs, dodging cops and courting crashes. Street racing wasn't a hobby. It was theology. Speed ain't about the clock, he'd growl to his crew, wiping sweat from his brow with a rag that smelled of high-octane regret. It's about outrunning what's chasing you. In those pre-war nights, with the whine of superchargers splitting the air and the acrid bite of burnt rubber hanging like fog, Ray learned that machines had souls. They groaned when lied to, sang when set free. But the Army? The Army treated tanks like obedient mules, harnessed, hobbled, and herded. His first posting was to the 2nd Armored Division, hell on wheels, training grounds in dusty Texas flats where the sun baked the earth to cracked pottery. Ray arrived with a duffel of tools he'd smuggled past the quartermaster. Wire strippers from his dad's yard, a torque wrench he'd machined himself from a busted axle. The other grunts ribbed him. Farm boys from Iowa who thought a carburetor was French for fancy hat. City kids from Brooklyn who fixed Jeeps with prayers and profanity. But Ray? He was the quiet one, the ghost in the motor pool, coaxing life from engines that the mechanics declared DOA. Sergeant Daniels, gruff with a southern drawl, barking orders in a reenactment scene. "Cole, what in the hell are you doing under that hull? We got inspections in an hour." The camera cuts to a staged reconstruction. A line of Shermans, olive-drab behemoths squatting under camouflage netting. Ray, lanky and sharp-jawed, his uniform sleeves rolled to expose forearms etched with faint scars, slides out from beneath tank number 12. His face is smudged, eyes narrowed against the glare. In his hand, a governor assembly, the Sherman speed limiter, a brass-bound chokehold designed by armchair engineers in Washington who feared a tank moving faster than 25 miles per hour might outrun its own infantry support. Or worse, its common sense. Cole, wiping his hands, voice low and edged like a revving idol. "Just listenin', Sarge. She's coughin' like she swallowed gravel. That governor's pinchin' her windpipe." Daniels, broad-shouldered and bull-necked, the platoon leader who'd risen from buck private by memorizing the field manual like Holy Writ, snorted. He was the embodiment of military precision. Boots polished to a mirror shine even in the dust, a mustache trimmed with the regularity of Reveille. To him, the Sherman was sacred geometry. Don't tamper with the divine. Daniels said, "Field manual says leave it be, Grease Hands. You think you're Henry Ford now? One wrong twist and you'll flood the crankcase. Get your ass to the line. We're drillin' hull-down positions till sundown." Ray bit back the retort bubbling in his throat. Factory specs, he thought, the words tasting like ash. They build 'em safe, not alive. Back home in the junkyard wars of Detroit, he'd yanked V8s from totaled Packards and mated them to Dodge frames with nothing but baling wire and spite. Speed was survival then, outrunning rival crews to the choicest wrecks, dodging the scrapyard dog's jaws. But here, the Army's safe meant slow. The Sherman's R975 churned out 400 horses, but the transmission, a manual 5-speed with synchromesh that worked about as well as a politician's promise, dragged like an anchor. Weight, 30 tons. Tracks, narrow, prone to throwing in mud. And that, Governor? It capped you at a jogging pace, lest you spin out on a curve or overheat the cooling system. Ray had seen it in maneuvers. Tanks belching blue smoke, crews cursing as they shoveled mud from sprockets, all because some colonel in a starched collar decided velocity was a vice. That night, under a sky bruised purple by prairie dusk, Ray slipped back to the motor pool. The air hummed with cicadas and the faint, conspiratorial tick of cooling metal. He dragged a lantern close, its flame dancing shadows across the Sherman's flank. Tank number 12 wasn't assigned to anyone yet. Just another serial-stamped orphan, waiting for a crew. But to Ray, she was already christened. The Mule. Stubborn, unyielding, built for hauling but aching to gallop. He popped the engine bay, the hinges groaning like an old man's joints. The R9975 stared back. 9 cylinders in radial splendor, each piston a fist ready to punch the sky. But the ancillary guts, the fuel lines snaking like veins, the carburetor's butterfly valve fluttering uncertainly, whispered complaints. Ray's fingers traced the governor linkage, feeling the play, the hesitation. She's throttled, he muttered to himself, choked by suits who never smelled cordite. Hours blurred into a ritual. He scavenged from the boneyard row, a busted Jeep's transfer case for its lightweight gears, aircraft throttle linkage pilfered from a crashed P-47 wreck they'd hauled in last week. No blueprints, no micrometers, just the hum in his veins, the intuitive geometry of a man who'd rebuilt his first engine at 14, using a hubcap for a flywheel. Weld spat sparks into the dark, blue, white, and furious. He rebalanced the transmission countershaft with twists of scrap wire, tension like guitar strings tuned to a forbidden chord. The governor? He bypassed it with a jury-rigged solenoid, salvaged from a radio truck's innards, allowing the throttle to breathe full, up to 40, maybe 45, if the stars aligned. By dawn, his hands trembled from fatigue, nails caked with filings like war paint. The crew found him slumped against the track, a half-smoked Lucky Strike dangling from his lip. Private Ellis, wide-eyed kid from Philly, loader in training, peering over the sponson with a mix of awe and nerves. "Jesus greasehands, what'd you do? She looks like she ate a buzzsaw." Ellis was the platoon's jester, all freckles and fast talk, the kind who loaded shells with one hand while cracking wise about the Kraut's love for sauerkraut. But even he paused, sensing the shift. The way the air around the Mule felt charged like the moment before a storm breaks. Cole, pushing to his feet, voice rough as sandpaper. "Gave her legs, Ellis. Factory built her to crawl. I made her run." Word spread like oil on water. By Chow, the maintenance crew, those grizzled warrant officers with grease monkey stripes and souls pickled in regulation, gathered like crows. Warrant Officer Hale, chewing tobacco, spitting a brown arc. "Cole, you dumb Mick, that's a court-martial waiting to happen. Over-rev that mill, and you'll grenade the block. Revert it, or I'll write you up myself." Laughter rippled through them, coarse and comforting, the sound of men clinging to the familiar. Ray met their eyes, unflinching. They hear the manual, he thought. I hear the scream. But the real test loomed not in inspections, but in the crucible across the Atlantic. July 1944. Normandy. The Hedgerows, those ancient, earthen walls laced with bocage, turning French farmland into a labyrinth of ambush and mire. D-Day had come and gone, beaches stained red. But the push inland was a butcher's grind. Shermans, those vaunted liberators, wallowed like hippos in the sludge. Clutch plates fried under torque, radiators clogged with pulverized chalk, tracks shedding links like snakeskin in the rain. The Germans waited in the green shadows, their Panthers and Tigers. Sleek, sloped predators with Maybach engines that hit 30 miles per, guns that spat death at 2,000 yards, picking off the slow ones first. Ray's platoon shipped out on the Queen Elizabeth, a gray Leviathan crammed with seasick GIs and the metallic tang of oiled machinery lashed below decks. The Mule rode in her hold, modifications hidden under tarps, a secret tattooed on steel. As the coast of England faded astern, Ray stood at the rail, wind whipping his field jacket, staring at the white caps. "Speed means survival," he whispered to the waves. "If you can move faster than fear, you live." The invasion wasn't glory, it was geometry gone mad. Omaha Beach, then the bloody slog to St. Lo. Ray's crew drew the Mule at Carentan. Daniels at the helm, Ellis on the 75, Ray as gunner and de facto mechanic, wedged in the turret with his tools and his ghosts. The first patrols were baptism by mud. Engines laboring at 1,500 RPM, hulls scraping bocage roots that clawed like fingers from the grave. Other tanks faltered, clutches slipping, finals whining to a halt under indirect fire. But the Mule? She pulled ahead, just a hair, her revs climbing where others flatlined. Then came the incident. A routine advance toward a crossroads farm, July 12th. Mortars whispered from the mist, 88s cracking like thunderclaps. The platoon buttoned up, turrets traversing blindly. Daniels called the push, throttles floored. But the Mule seized, governor linkage binding under mud-caked stress, the transmission locking like a seized jaw. Tracks spun futilely, belching diesel smoke. Shells bracketed them, earth erupting in geysers of soil and shrapnel. Daniels, over the intercom, voice tight with adrenaline. "Cole, what the hell? She's bogged. Reverse it, goddammit." Cole, calm amid the din, hands already probing the breach. "Hold tight, Sarge, she's fightin' the leash." A near miss rocked the hull, paint flaking like old skin. Ellis yelped, shell casing hot against his thigh. Ray felt it then, the machine's panic, a tremor through the mounts. Not today, he vowed. In that frozen instant, as the world narrowed to the thunder of impacts, Ray's mind raced back to Detroit alleys, where a bad weld meant a wreck, and a wreck meant you didn't eat. He kicked the escape hatch, dropping into the slurry outside, wrench in hand, as rounds stitched the hedgerow behind him. The crew hauled him back minutes later, the crisis averted by a neighboring tank's tow. But as they limped to rally point, Ray's eyes burned with a fiercer fire. That night, in a shattered barn lit by truck headlights and the red glow of Victory cigars, he went to work. No sleep, no rations, just the lantern's hiss and the night's chorus of distant booms. He ripped the transmission pan, oil sluicing black as blood. Gears gleamed accusingly, factory fresh, but flawed. The Jeep salvage came out, aluminum lightness to shave rotational mass. Aircraft throttle, delicate as watch springs, replaced the crude limiter. Wire twists became makeshift universals, intuition his level. The crew watched from the shadows, a semicircle of skepticism. Ellis passed a flask. Daniels paced, quoting regs like curses. Ellis, half-whisper, awe creeping in. "You sure this ain't voodoo, Ray? She's gonna shake apart like a drunk on payday." Cole, not looking up, sparks flying as he arcs a weld. "Ain't voodoo, it's breath. She's been holding it too long." By false dawn, it was done. The Mule's belly stitched shut, a Frankenstein scar across her undercarriage. Ray fired her up alone, the starter whining, then cough, the cough of ignition, building to a bellow that rattled the rafters. Not the factory's polite rumble, but a roar, raw and unchained, the sound of a beast tasting freedom. Revs climbed unchecked, the tack needle kissing redline and dancing back, alive. He didn't fix it to go faster, he fixed it to live. Normandy wasn't a battlefield, it was a beast. July 1944, and the bocage bit back. Those earthen dikes, relics of medieval farmers who'd walled off the world with roots and resentment, now cradled death. German 88s lurked in the folds, their flat trajectories slicing through the fog like accusations. American tanks, those proud Shermans, symbols of industrial might, found themselves humbled, their 16-inch tracks slipping on slopes that a goat would scorn. Engines overheated in the humid vise, clutches burned through like paper in a furnace, and the air reeked of scorched rubber and unspoken dread. For the crew's survival wasn't in the kill, it was in the crawl, the desperate inching forward before the next ambush turned you to scrap. Ray Cole's platoon had tasted it early. Assigned to the 3rd Armored, Spearhead, under the relentless drive of General Collins, they were tasked with punching through to Coutances. A 25-mile gut check across a chessboard of kill zones. Tank number 12, the Mule, rolled out at dawn on the 14th, her hull scarred from the near miss at the crossroads. Daniels gripped the periscopes like a man clutching rosaries. Ellis hummed off-key show tunes to mask the shakes. And Ray, wedged in the gunner's seat, felt every vibration like a pulse in his temples. The columns snaked through apple orchards turned to splintered skeletons, the lead Shermans kicking up divots that filled with rainwater like open graves. The advance started with promise. Radios crackled with Patton's ghost. "Grip 'em by the nose, kick 'em in the ass." And the engines thrummed in unison, a mechanical hymn to momentum, but the land had other plans. By noon, the rain came sideways, a biblical lash that turned fields to quagmires. The Mule hit a dip first, a deceptive furrow hidden by high grass, and her tracks clawed air for a heartbeat before digging in. The transmission whined, gears hunting for purchase, but the governor clamped down like a vice. RPMs redlined at 2200, then flatlined. Smoke belched from the stacks, acrid and black, carrying the tang of fried bearings. Daniels, thumping the bulkhead, voice amplified by the intercom's tinny echo. "Cole, she's bucking like a damn bronco. What you do to her innards back in that barn? Feels like the whole driveline's about to snap." The hull shuddered as another tank in the column, Old Reliable, they called her, for her predictable plodding, ground to a halt astern. Mortar rounds began to walk the line, lazy arcs from Nebelwerfers that sounded like laughter from hell. Wumps of earth erupted, showering the turret with clods that rattled like dice in a cup. Ellis ducked instinctively, his loader's rack a cage of brass-cased judgment. Ellis, half laugh, half gasp, fumbling for the escape hatch crank. "Aw hell, grease hands. This your junkyard magic goin' sour? I ain't dying in a mud puddle 'cause you played mad scientist." Ray didn't answer at first. He was already moving, instincts overriding the chaos. His boot slammed the auxiliary switch, killing the ignition before the torque sheared something vital. The silence was profane, a void where the engine's growl had been, filled only by the patter of rain on armor and the distant yip of MG-42s probing the flanks. Not the gears, Ray thought, the diagnosis flashing like a spark across synapses honed in Detroit's demolition derbies. The governor linkage. Mud packed the pivot, bound the solenoid. She's choking on her own caution. "Out!" Daniels bellowed, popping the hatch. The crew bailed like rats from a foundering ship, splashing into calf-deep slurry that sucked it at their boots like greedy mouths. Ray lingered last, slinging his toolkit over one shoulder, the weight a familiar anchor. Under the lip of the hull, shielded by the sponson's curve, he dropped to his belly, probing the underbelly access panel with a flashlight's beam cutting the gloom. Water sluiced over him, cold as regret, but his world narrowed to the mechanical confession. Linkage rods gummed with Normandy clay, the aircraft throttle he'd grafted now twisted like a pretzel, its delicate springs protesting the abuse. A round skipped off the glacis plate above him, pinged, a ricochet that sang like a struck tuning fork. Ray flinched, but didn't flinch away. Factory fix would have quit here, he told himself, prying the fouled pivot with a crowbar. But I gave her fight. Minutes stretched to eternity. The platoon rallied 50 yards back, machine guns chattering defiance at shadows. Daniels' DAC voice cut through the din on the field phone. "Daniels, Cole, you got 30 seconds before I leave your ass for the buzzards. We got packed guns zeroing us." With a grunt that echoed his father's junkyard curses, Ray freed the linkage, flushing it with diesel from his canteen. The solenoid clicked, once, twice, then held. He resealed the panel, mud oozing between his fingers like war-zone lubricant, and scrambled back aboard. "Clear," he yelled, slamming the hatch. Daniels nursed the starter, the engine hacking to life with a cough that spoke of grudging respect. But as they lurched forward, the transmission hunted again, slipping into neutral under load, the clutch plates glazing from the strain. That night, rally point in a bombed-out chateau's courtyard, walls pocked with shrapnel craters, vines clawing at the mortar like vengeful ghosts, Ray claimed the Mule. The platoon bedded down in the shell of a grand hall, floor strewn with shattered porcelain, and the ghosts of French aristocrats who'd fled the same storm. Fires crackled in oil drums, casting long shadows that danced like imps. Rations were cold seas, spam and crackers that tasted of tin and tomorrow's hunger. But Ray had no appetite. His meal was machinery. By firelight's edge, where the carbide lamps hissed like conspirators, he went deeper. The crew watched from their bedrolls, a ragged semicircle of skepticism and fatigue. Daniels nursed a flask, his mustache drooping like wilted wheat. Ellis whittled a stick into pointless shapes, his jokes fallen flat under the weight of the day's near misses. The maintenance crew, those warrant officers with their clipboards and condemnations, had caught wind via runner. They arrived like inquisitors, flashlights probing the wounds. Warrant Officer Hale, squatting by the transmission access, his breath fogging in the chill, voice thick with tobacco and authority. "Told you, Cole. That bypasses amateur hour. Look at this weld, porous as Swiss cheese. You're one pothole from grenading the whole box. Revert to stock, or I'll chain her to the wrecker myself. Ordnance don't play with field mods, they court-martial 'em." The words landed like hammer blows on anvil steel, but Ray's hands didn't pause. He had the transmission pan off now, bolts scattered like dice on the cobblestones, oil pooling black and viscous under the lantern. The guts gleamed accusingly. The countershaft he'd lightened with Jeep gears, now scored from the bind. Universals, tensioned by his wire improvisations, frayed but faithful. "They're right," a whisper in his skull admitted. "One wrong rev, and she eats herself." But instinct overrode, that same gut fire that had rebuilt a 32 deuce coupe from a bonfire wreck, racing it to glory before the cops closed the track. Cole, voice steady as a governor arm, eyes on the work, sparks from his arc welder painting his face demonic. "Stock gets you killed slow, Hale. This gets you home." Ellis snorted, but there was no mirth in it. "Ellis, home? Man, with you tinkering, we're lucky if she don't pitch us into the channel. What's next, wings from a busted Piper cub?" Laughter rippled, nervous, brittle, the kind that masks the bone-deep fear of boys playing at war. Even Daniels cracked a grim smile, passing the flask Ray's way. But Ray waved it off, diving deeper. He scavenged anew, a coil spring from a wrecked half-track for better tension, copper wiring stripped from a shot-up radio Jeep to reinforce the solenoid feed. No schematics, just the feel, the harmonic hum when parts kissed true. Hours bled away, the fire popped and died, embers winking like distant tracers. Ray's back screamed mutiny, shoulders knotted from the awkward angles, but he pushed. Making her breathe, he'd said before. Now, it was resurrection. By the witching hour, the rebuild crested. The pan resealed with fresh gaskets cannibalized from a spare air filter, welds cooling to dull red scars. Ray wiped his brow, leaving a stripe of grime like war paint, and climbed aboard alone. The crew stirred as the starter whirred click, then the moment of truth. The engine caught with a belch, backfiring once like a gunshot in church, then settling into idle. But this was no factory purr. Revs climbed smooth, the tack needle arcing past 2,500, 3,000, unchoked, unapologetic. The hull vibrated not with protest but purpose, a deep thrum that resonated through the seats like a heartbeat quickening. Hale, roused by the noise, stomped over, his flashlight beam lancing the exhaust. "Hale, kill it, you fool! You'll wake every Fritz from here to Berlin." But Ray eased the throttle, slipping into gear. The mules stirred, tracks clanking softly on the courtyard stones, then surge. She lunged forward, not the lumbering heave of her sisters, but a predator's prowl, acceleration biting like a hidden deer. 20 yards, 30, past the chateau's gate, into the moonlit meadow beyond, mud sluicing harmlessly from her flanks. The engine sang, a baritone roar laced with soprano whine, gears meshing in flawless defiance. Ray braked hard, slewing her around in a pivot that would have shredded a stock transmission, then idled back, the air shimmering with heat haze from her flanks. The crew spilled out, jaws slack as dropped wrenches. Ellis whooped, clapping Ray's shoulder hard enough to bruise. Daniels lit a cigarette with shaking hands, exhaling smoke that mingled with the exhaust's blue veil. Even Hale paused, his condemnation curdling to curiosity, probing the scars with a calloused thumb. Daniels, low, almost reverent, flicking ash into the dark. "Jesus, grease hands. She's alive. How fast you reckon she'll push now?" Cole, sliding from the hatch, legs rubbery but eyes alight, tasting the night's promise. Fast enough to leave the mud behind. Fast enough to chase the dawn. Word spread by morning muster, a virus of whispers through the division. Cole's Frankenstein, they called it, half in jest, half in hope. Skeptics doubled down. Hale, to the motor pool brass. "It's a powder keg on tracks. One over-rev and she'll scatter parts from Paris to Poland. But the platoon?" They climbed aboard with a new hunger, the fear tempered by that midnight roar. The first real test came at false dawn. A probing patrol to clear a ridge. The column rolled out, 5 Shermans, the Mule at rear guard, her modifications still a half-buried secret. The slope was a bastard, 20 degrees of slick clay pocked with shell holes brimming like witches' cauldrons. Lead tanks bogged immediately, engines bellowing futilely, crews dismounting with shovels and curses. Daniels called the halt, but Ray's voice cut the static. Cole, over intercom, calm as a mechanic's diagnostic. "Sarge, let me take point. Trust the fix." Daniels hesitated, the weight of command a yoke. Then, "Daniels, you're on, Cole, but if she blows, it's your ghost haul in the tow cable." The mule surged past, throttle pinned. Tracks bit deep, not slipping but gripping, the lightened gears spinning free where others labored. Up she climbed. 30 miles per hour on the grade, wind whistling through vision slits, the world blurring to green streaks. At the crest, she crested like a wave, turret traversing to scan the reverse slope empty. Below, the platoon gaped, mud flying in rooster tails, but no smoke, no seas, just momentum, pure and profane. They laughed when it started, they stopped when it roared. Dawn in the bocage wasn't mercy, it was a mask. July 15, 1944, and Operation Cobra loomed like a storm on the General Staff's maps. Eisenhower's hammer to shatter the German lines west of St. Lo. But for the tankers of the 3rd Armored, it was no grand strategy. It was the grind. Orders crackled over the airwaves. Advance 25 miles to the Vera River, link up with the 4th Infantry, and carve a breach before Rommel's reinforcements could plug the gap. The terrain was a traitor's riddle. Sunken lanes, flanked by 6-foot hedgerows, fields pocked with bomb craters that swallowed vehicles whole, and air thick with the humidity of a pressure cooker. Heat rose from the earth in waves, baking the crews in their steel tombs, sweat tracing rivulets down necks already chafed raw by collar webbing. Shermans, those 30-ton titans, were built for the steppes of theory, not this verdant vice. Their narrow tracks, barely wider than a man's shoulders, sank into the loam like knives into butter, demanding constant throttle to maintain way. Engines labored at the edge of their envelopes, the Wright Continentals guzzling 100 octane like a dipsomaniac at last call, radiators hissing steam that smelled of boiled brass and desperation. Ray Cole's platoon drew the point for Charlie Company, 5 tanks strung out along a farm track that twisted like a serpent's spine toward Hill 192. The Mule rolled at the van, her modifications a clandestine heartbeat under the hull. Daniels had relented after the ridge run, Daniels in the pre-dawn huddle clapping Ray's shoulder with a mix of gruff pride and lingering doubt. "All right, grease hands, you lead, but if that beast throws a rod, we're walking." Ellis, wedged in the loader's pit with his rack of 75mm projectiles stacked like cordwood, shot Ray a wink over the intercom. "Ellis, just don't leave us eating your dust, hotshot. I got blisters from the last joyride." The maintenance crew had signed off with a shrug, Hale muttering about temporary dispensation, but the whispers persisted through the division like exhaust fumes. Cole's Junkyard gamble, a powder keg primed for the bump that would blow it sky high. The column lurched forward at 600, the sun a copper coin cresting the hedgerows, gilding the dew-slick leaves and false gold. The air hummed with the symphony of war's prelude. Idling diesels coughing to life, the metallic clank of turret rings traversing, the faint whup-whup of spotter planes droning overhead. Ray, eyes glued to the periscope's fisheye lens, felt the shift immediately. Where stock Shermans wallowed, fighting every incline like a man with a hangover, the Mule flowed. The lightened countershaft spun with less inertia, the Jeep-sourced gears meshing in a whisper rather than a grind. Revs climbed effortlessly past 2,800 RPM, the aircraft throttle feeding fuel in precise sips, unchoked by the factory's invisible reins. She hit 28 miles per hour on the straightaway, a velocity that pressed the crew back into their seats, the hull's vibration not a tremor of strain, but a thrum of vitality, like a stallion scenting the open plain. The first mile was deception. The track dipped into a sunken lane, walls of root-matted earth rising 8 feet on either flank, turning the world to a green tunnel. Lid elements, 2 Shermans from Baker Company ahead, bogged at the merge, their tracks spinning futilely in the churned slurry, engines bellowing protests that echoed off the bocage like trapped thunder. Crews bailed, cursing in the rising heat, shoveling muck with entrenching tools while air bursts from 105s probed the rear. Daniels keyed the radio, voice edged with the old skepticism. "Daniels, all stations, hold and consolidate. Looks like another mud wrestling match." But Ray's hand was already on the throttle quadrant, a sixth sense prickling. Not today, he thought, the memory of Detroit's rain-slick drags flashing, tires hydroplaning, but heart-hammering victory. "Negative, Sarge," he replied. Calm as oil on water. "Mule's got this. Follow my dust." Before Daniels could countermand, Ray goosed the pedal. The Mule surged, tracks biting deep, not slipping but propelling, the rebalanced universals distributing torque like a dancer's poise. Mud arced in rooster tails, but she pulled free, climbing the far bank with a growl that built to a howl. 30 yards 50. The lane opened to a fallow field, and there she stretched her legs, 35 miles per hour, wind whistling through the hatch seals, the world smearing to impressionist strokes of green and gray. Behind, the platoon gaped through their slits. Daniel's tank, stocked to the rivets, lumbered in pursuit, her governor clamping at 25, the transmission hunting gears like a drunk fumbling tease. Ellis whooping over the din, "Holy Mother of Detroit, Ray, she's hauling ass! We got wings or what?" Laughter crackled on the net, but undercut with awe, the kind that blooms when impossibility cracks. The Baker tanks, freed by the mule's tow rope, Ray doubling back with a grace that defied her mass, fell in line, their commanders querying. Litter Hargrove, from Baker 2, static-laced. "What the hell's your secret, Cole? You siphoned Patton's personal stash into that beast?" Ray didn't answer, his focus lasered on the terrain ahead. The heat was building now, a sauna's embrace that turned the turret into a foundry. Sweat stung his eyes, tracing paths through the grime caked on his brow, but he welcomed it. The burn of exertion, the slick grip on the gun traverse wheel. The field gave way to a series of low rises, deceptive swells that hid German outposts like snipers in tall grass. Spotters called it Pack 40s, those vicious 75mm anti-tanks, dug in at 800 yards, their rounds lancing flat and fast. The column buttoned up, turrets slewing left-right in frantic ballet, the whir of electric motors a counterpoint to the heart-pounding weight. The ambush cracked at 0830, a crack boom, the pack's muzzle blast, followed by the whip crack of shell on air. The lead Baker Sherman brewed up instantly, turret blown skyward in a gout of flame and fury, the crew's screams cut short by the inferno's roar. Shrapnel pinged off the mule's glacis like hail on tin, and Daniels barked the evade. "Daniels, flank left. Cole, take the high ground. Draw their fire." Ray didn't hesitate. Throttle floored, the mule lunged sideways, tracks gouging furrows as she powered up the nearest rise. Physics rebelled. 30 tons shouldn't fly, but the junkyard alchemy held, gears unburdened, engine breathing free. She crested at 32 miles per hour, turret already traversing toward the muzzle flash. The pack crew, shadows in a haystack revetment, gawked as the mule bore down, faster than any Sherman they'd clocked. Their second shot glanced high, shattering a branch that rained leaves like confetti on hell. Ray's gun barked in reply. Boom! The 75mm HE round arcing true, pulverizing the nest in a blossom of dust and screams. The platoon surged through the gap, the mule circling wide to cover the rear, her speed a shield that turned vulnerability to vector. By the field's far edge, two packs lay silent, their crews fleeing into the underbrush, and the advance resumed. Not as a crawl, but a charge. Word rocketed up the chain. By noon Chow halted in a copse of shattered elms where the air hung heavy with cordite and the sweet rot of trampled apples. Divisional brass rolled up in a jeep, maps fluttering like startled birds. Colonel Hayes, pipe clenched in teeth yellowed by K-rations, cornered Daniels under the mule's shade. Hayes, heard your point riders clocking speeds like a greyhound. What's the dope, Sergeant? Special fuel? Or did you steal a Kraut prototype? Daniels glanced at Ray, who knelt by the tracks. Torquing a bogey wheel with ritual care, his hands black as the oil he bled from the dipstick. Daniels, choosing words like shells from a rack. Nasir. Just Cole's fix, sir. Turned a mule into a thoroughbred. Hayes hawked a laugh, but his eyes sharpened, tracing the undercarriage scars visible in the dappled light. The maintenance crew hovered, Hale's face a thunderhead. Hale, muttering to a subordinate, "Told ya. One good run don't make it safe. Wait till the heat spikes. She'll seize like a virgin on prom night." But even he couldn't deny the metrics. The mule had covered 5 miles in the time others managed 3. Her engine temp steady at 180 degrees, where sisters nudged 220, smoke trailing thin as a cigarette's sigh. The afternoon push tested the limits. A crossroads at Marigny, where the road forked into a gauntlet of open pasture, 1,000 yards of flat exposure, sniper nests in the tree line opposite. Heat mirages danced, turning distant farmhouses to wavering phantoms, and the sun hammered down, baking the paint to a blister. The column stretched thin, engines thirsting through their 5th jerry can. Stock tanks faltered, one overheated on the approach, radiator boiling over in a geyser that steamed the air. Another threw a track on a shell-torn verge, links scattering like dice from a craps table. Crews dismounted under the merciless eye of Luftwaffe spotters circling high. the drone of their engines a taunt from the blue. The mule, though, she drank the punishment. Ray felt her pulse through the mounts. The subtle harmonic shift as revs kissed 3200, the whine of supercharger spooling like a banshee's keen. They hit the open stretch at 38 miles per hour, faster than Doctrine dreamed. The wind a gale through the vents, carrying the metallic tang of hot oil and the faint electric ozone of strained electrics. German machine guns stitched the ground ahead, tracers glowing like fireflies in daylight, but the mule weaved, Daniel's inputs translated to lateral bursts that no stock transmission could match, the lightened driveline pivoting on a dime. Bullets sparked off the hull, a staccato serenade, but she closed the gap, Ray's gun traversing in fluid arcs, stitching the nests with Coke's fire that chewed wood to splinters. Ellis whooped from below, loading with manic glee. Ellis, eat this, you square-head sons of bitches. We're coming like the devil's own hot rod. The platoon crested the far side intact. The mule lashed over the rise, her flanks scored but unbreached, engine settling to a contented purr. In the lee, as they refueled from a Bowser truck, the disbelief crested. GIs from adjacent units clustered, thumbs hooked in belts, eyes wide as they fingered the welds. A doe from the 29th Infantry, accent thick as cornbread. Y'all got a rocket in there? My half-track can't touch that. Ray wiped his face with a rag that smelled of defiance, saying nothing. Speed's the lie they tell slow men, he thought. It's just the gap between fear and freedom. Daniels clapped his back, the ridicule of weeks past evaporated like morning mist. Even Hale, clipboard in hand for the log, paused his scribbling. Hale, grudging under his breath, ain't right, but damn if it don't work. By dusk, as the platoon dug in on the Vera's outskirts, hedgerows piled with engineer charges, the horizon bruised purple by artillery's farewell, the rumors had metastasized. Cole's mule wasn't platoon lore anymore. It was divisional legend, a whisper in the wire that reached regimental S3s plotting the morrow's thrust. Skeptics still sneered. Hayes to his XO in the Jeep slipstream. Field mods like that? One miracle, don't rewrite the manual. But the crews? They watched the mule with hunger, her roar a siren's call to the possible. The Junkyard fix was no longer a joke. It was a threat. Dusk in the breakout wasn't respite, it was reckoning. July 17, 1944, an Operation Cobra had cracked the German crust like an eggshell under Bootheel. St. Lo a smoldering scar, the Wehrmacht reeling westward in a frantic danse macabre. For the 3rd Armored, the orders were biblical. Pursue and destroy, a 15-mile dash across the Tessie-Servier plain to sever the retreat at the Coustances Gap. Open fields here, for once, not the bocage's claustrophobic embrace, but vast pastures rolling like a rumpled blanket, dotted with hayricks and the skeletal husks of burned-out farms. The sun dipped low, painting the horizon in blood-orange strokes, long shadows stretching like fingers to clutch at the unwary. Air was thick with the perfume of crushed clover and cordite, the Luftwaffe's remnants harried by Jabos, Allied fighter bombers, whose dives split the sky like divine wrath. But the ground? That was the devil's domain, where Panthers prowled. Those 45-ton Panzers, sloped and sinister, their 75mm KWKs belching death at 3,000 meters, Maybach engines purring at 30 miles per hour across terrain that humbled lesser beasts. Ray Cole's platoon, now augmented to 7 tanks, the Mule the undisputed alpha, rolled at the column's spear point, dust plume trailing like a comet's tail. Daniels had yielded the driver's seat to a farm boy private named Kowalski, his foot heavy on the pedal, but guided by Ray's ghost over the intercom. Ellis loaded with the fervor of a man cheating fate, stacking AP rounds like talismans. Daniels manned the 50 cal cupola, his eyes hawk-sharp on the flanks. The modifications had earned grudging canonization. Hale's crew, once hounds of heresy, now slipped extra oil filters under the tarp, muttering about Cole's edge as if it were contraband gold. Whispers had ascended to battalion, scouts reporting the mule's feats, S2 intel officers sketching hasty diagrams of her anomalous performance. But Ray? He felt no crown, only the vibration through the mounts, a subtle tremor, like a fever building in the driveline, the Jeep gears humming at the cusp of song or scream. The advance began with the false calm of victory. Radios buzzed with elation, Captain Reese, company CO, voice crackling like popcorn in lard. Spearhead actual, this is Cobra's fang. Eyes open for stragglers, Fritz is folding like a cheap suit. Push hard, boys. Berlin by Christmas. The columns stretch 2 miles. Sherman's in echelon, half-tracks trailing with does clutching rifles like crutches. The mule led by 200 yards, her speed a buffer. 32 miles per hour on the macadam remnants, wind keening through the hatches, carrying the faint, acrid bite of overheated brakes from the followers. Ray traversed the turret idly, the 75mm barrel a black lance against the fading light, his mind adrift on the harmonic whine below. She's thirsty, he thought, the intuition prickling like static before a storm. Pushed hard all day. Radiators whisper in steam. One more sprint, and she'll ask for the bill. Twilight deepened to indigo bruise as they crested a low swell near the hamlet of Montmartin. Farmsteads reduced to matchsticks, a church steeple canted like a drunk's hat. The plain unfolded, 800 yards of open graze, golden in the last light, bisected by a rutted cart track. Intel pegged it clear. Fallschirmjäger remnants, maybe a dozen, but no armor. Wishful cartography. Daniels keyed the all-call. Daniels, mule lead, eyes sharp. Ellis, ready on cokes. Cole, you paint the picture down there. Ray peered through the episcope, the world a mosaic of shadows and suspicion. Haystacks loomed like silent sentinels, a copse of willows fringing the far tree line, too dense, too still. Then, movement. A glint, sunstruck optics, followed by the low, predatory growl of a diesel, muffled but unmistakable. Panther. Singleton, hull down behind a rise, her interleaved wheels churning turf as she pivoted. Radio silence shattered in the ambush's maw. It erupted at 2015 hours, a thunderclap from hell. The Panther's caquet barked. Crack. The AP round, slamming into the trail tank's turret ring like God's own hammer. Metal screamed, the Sherman erupting in a pyre that lit the dusk like a flare, secondary blasts popping ammo racks in staccato fury. Crew's screams cut short, replaced by the whoosh of flames licking 30 tons of funeral pyre. Chaos cascaded, the column jinked left-right, engines revving in panic's pitch, gunners traversing blindly into the gloaming. Nebelwerfers joined the dirge from the tree line, screaming memes, their gas trail arcs blooming in airbursts that showered shrapnel like metallic rain. Bullets whined, tracers lancing the dark like fireflies drunk on malice. A half-track flipped on the verge, does spilling like marionettes with severed strings. Daniels's voice sliced the intercom storm. Daniels. Ambush, all tanks bound left. Smoke 'em. Cole, flank right, draw that bastard's eye. Ellis, load AP, pronto. The hull bucked as Kowalski cranked the tillers, the mules slewing wide in a pivot that would have shredded a stock final drive. But Ray's fix held, wire-tensioned universals flexing like sinew, the countershaft's lightness turning mass to momentum. Throttle pinned, she leapt, not the lumbering lunge of doctrine, but a surge that pressed Ray into his harness, G-forces tugging at his gut like a street racer's launch. 35 miles per hour. Climbing to 40, the plane blurred, grass whispering under tracks that clawed earth without mercy. Smoke grenades popped from the platoon, veils of white phosphorus blooming to cloak the retreat, but the mule pierced it, a shadow in the fog, her exhaust a blue ghost in the mirrors. The Panther commander, some Oberfeldwebel with a monocle and a death wish, tracked them, his turret's electric hum a futile serenade. He fired again. Boom! The round plowing furrow 10 yards starboard, dirt geysering like a struck vein. Ray felt the near miss as a pressure wave, the hull shuddering, but the mule didn't falter. Faster than physics should allow, he marveled, hands blurring on the traverse wheel, the gun sight picture steadying on the Panther's glacis. Physics? Factory fools wrote the rules, Ray rewrote them in weld and wire. Revs screamed past 3,400 RPM, the R975's radials howling in choral ecstasy, supercharger whine piercing the cabin like a scalpel. Heat cascaded, gauges nudging yellow, the air thickening with the metallic tang of stressed oil, but she flew, arcing wide in a flanking curve that outpaced the Panzer's traverse, closing to 400 yards in heartbeats. Ellis slammed home the AP round, the breech clunking like fate's lock. Ellis, voice pitched high over the roar, sweat flying. Up. Sabbat or solid, that Fritz looks thirsty for it. Cole, cool as chilled crankcase, reticle kissing the commander's cupola. Solid. Right there, driver's hatch. Fire. The 75mm boom crump, muzzle flash blooming white hot, the recoil jarring raised teeth like a prizefighter's hook. The shell lanced true, punching through the mantlet at 500 yards, the Panther's front deck erupting in a sympathetic blast as the round cooked off the ready rack. Flames jetted from hatches flung wide, the Panzer slewing dead sideways, her engine a pyre's bellow. Secondary detonations walked the hull. Ammo, fuel, the whole alchemical brew, turning 45 tons of Teutonic engineering to a bonfire that painted the night in hellish chiaroscuro. But the ambush wasn't solo. From the willows, 2 more shadows stirred, Panzer IVs, long-barreled variants, their Maybachs snarling to life as spotters vectored them. The column was unraveling. Daniel's tank brewed a track from a grazing hit, grinding to a halt in a spray of links. Reese's command Sherman laid smoke but caught around to the engine deck, belching black fury. Radios wailed, Reese choking on smoke. This is Fang. Evacuate east. Cole, cover the pullback. Godspeed, son. The plea laced with the finality of men who knew the odds. Ray didn't flinch. Kowalski, hard right. Circle 'em. The Mule obeyed, tracks gouging divots that smoked from friction, her speed a blasphemy. 42 miles per hour now, the tack redlining in flirtation, vibration harmonizing into a symphony of strain. The Lee V fired wild, round supersonic overhead with a crack like lightning's whip. Ray returned fire on the move, the gun's stabilizer, tuned by his own hand with shimmed mounts, holding 0 through the weave. Boom. He, this time, blasting the tree line in a storm of splinters and screams, buying the platoon seconds to reform. The second EV lunged from cover, 300 yards closing fast, her KWK traversing to match the Mule's arc. Kowalski white-knuckled the controls, the hull fishtailing on a dew-slick patch, but Ray's voice anchored. Cole, steady. Feeder revs, don't fight the slide. Instinct from Detroit nights, where one twitch meant the wall. Here, it meant the crew. The Mule stabilized, surging parallel, Ray's reticle dancing over the IV's side armor. Thinner there, a fatal invitation. Ellis rammed another AP, sweat stinging his eyes, the loader's pit a sauna of brass heat. Ellis, gasping, almost laughing through the fear. Ray, she's shaking like my girl on a bumpy road. You sure this junkyard heart ain't gonna quit? Cole thought, not tonight, not while they need her. She quits when I say, fire on my mark, now. The gun spat defiance, the shell burrowing into the flank with a thunk crunch, igniting the fuel lines in a liquid fireball. The IV careened, shedding track in fiery loops, her crew bailing into the grass only to be cut down by coax bursts from Daniel's 50, now limping on 3 wheels. The tree line fell silent, the Nebelwerfer's crews scattering like roaches to dawn, the ambush's fury guttering to embers. The platoon coalesced in the lee of a rise, the Mule circling like a shepherd's dog, her engine's roar a ward against the dark. Smoke wreathed her like a victor's laurel, flanks pocked with gouges but unbreached, the gauges, miraculously, settling from the brink. Daniel's voice crackled over the net, hoarse with dust and deliverance. Daniels, Cole, grease hands, you just danced with the devil and stepped on his toes. Owe you a case of scotch when we hit Paris. Ray slumped in his seat, the adrenaline ebb leaving him hollow, the cabin reeking of burnt powder and ozone. Below, the driveline ticked, cooling, contracting, a sigh of spent fury. Close, he admitted to the ghosts. Too close. She's given more than she got. But the plane lay open now, the gap seized, the retreat severed. Cobra's fang had bitten deep thanks to a junkyard's whim. He didn't drive, he flew. Victory in the gap wasn't triumph, it was toll. July 17th bled into the 18th, the Tessie plane a charnel house of twisted steel and silenced guns. Operation Cobra's jaws had clamped shut on the 7th Army's tail. 12,000 prisoners, 50 panzers smoldering like sacrificial pyres. The road to Avranches flung wide for the liberation's flood. For the 3rd Armored, the night was a fragile armistice. The column reformed in a shallow draw, hulls nosed into the earth for cover, the distant crump of long-range 155s, a lullaby of lingering war. Sentries paced with M1s slung low, the air thick with the mingled scents of diesel exhaust and damp clover, the horizon etched in firefly tracers from rearguard skirmishes. The Mule squatted at the draw's lip, her flanks scarred with the black kisses of near misses, tracks caked in the night's mud like war's own war paint. She'd carried the day, flanked the ambush, bought the platoon breath and bone, but machines, like men, pay in pieces for their fury. Ray Cole slumped in the gunner's cradle, the harness straps biting into shoulders knotted from hours of tension. His eyes, bloodshot slits in a face grimed to abstract mask, stared unseeing at the periscope's dead glow. The cabin was a sweatbox turned sepulcher. Gauges flickered erratically under the red nightlight, the oil pressure needle hovering like a drunk at last call, the temp gauge, accusatory 210 degrees and climbing. Below, the driveline murmured, not the clean thrum of dawn's promise, but a faltering stutter, the Jeep gears chattering like teeth in fever, the aircraft solenoid hissing steam from its improvised seals. She gave all, Ray thought, the words heavy as lead slugs in his skull. And I asked more. Exhaustion wasn't just bone deep, it was marrow deep, a hollow ache that echoed the engine's protest, his pulse sinking to the faltering radial's chuff-chuff. Daniels popped the cupola hatch first, the clang echoing like a dropped shell casing. Cool night air rushed in, laced with the bittersweet rot of spent blossoms and the oily tang of cooling radiators. He scanned the dark, 45 holstered but thumbed loose, before dropping back inside, his bulk filling the commander's nook. Daniels, voice roughened by smoke inhalation, clapping Ray's pauldron with a gloved hand that lingered. Grease hands, you pulled a rabbit out of Patton's hat tonight. That flank, pure poetry in plate. Fritz didn't know what hit him till the fire did. The crew stirred like ghosts roused from graves. Kowalski, the driver, unfolded from his fetal curl behind the tillers, his farm boy face pale as milk under the helmet liner, hands still flexing phantom controls. Kowalski, whisper thick, Midwestern vowels stretched thin. Felt like riding lightning, Sarge. Thought we'd shake the stars loose. Ellis, wedged amid the loader's clutter, empty casings scattered like brass confetti, passed around a canteen, the water tepid and chlorine bitter. His freckles stood out stark against the soot, eyes wide with the manic gleam of the unscathed. Ellis, forcing a grin that didn't reach, voice cracking on the edge of awe. Hell, Ray, you turned her into Bessie. Old man's prize mare, but with teeth. I loaded so fast I near shot my thumb off. What's the secret? You whisper sweet nothings to the gears. Laughter bubbled, brittle, involuntary, the sound of men reclaiming air from fear's clutch. But Ray stayed silent, his gaze fixed on the bulkhead's rivets, tracing their cold constellations. The intercom crackled faintly, residual static from the net's overload, ghosts of commands long obeyed. They laugh 'cause they breathe through it, he reflected, the junkyard creed surfacing like oil on water. I hear the cost. He keyed the engine cutoff, the starter whining reluctant before the radials coughed to stillness. In the abrupt quiet, the cabin amplified every betrayal. A ping from the cooling manifold, the drip-drip of condensation from the hull seams, and deeper, a low, metallic groan from the transmission tunnel, like bones knitting wrong. Check her vitals, Cole. Daniels ordered, but softer now, the sergeant's bark blunted by the debt unspoken. Can't have our miracle mare thrown a shoe before the vet up. Ray unstrapped, joints protesting like rusted hinges, and dropped to the engine deck via the rear hatch. The night enveloped him, stars pricking the canopy like nailheads in black velvet, the plane's vastness a reminder of how small their frenzy had been. He popped the bay panels, the hinges squealing protest, and plunged his flashlight into the guts. The R-975 loomed, 9 cylinders arrayed in radial judgment, cowling scarred from the day's heat cycles. Oil wept from a gasket seam, black tears tracing the block. The supercharger impeller spun to its limits, bore faint bluing from friction kiss. But the transmission, the heart of his heresy, told the truth. He crawled beneath, the undercarriage a cathedral of grime and gleam, his light picking out the scars. Wire universals frayed to copper whispers, Jeep gears etched with heat checks like lightning veins, the countershaft bearing, salvaged and slimmed, binding under torque residue, its race scored like a track after the big race. A hand on his boot, Ellis peering down like a concerned imp. Ellis? Doc? She's singing or screaming? I ain't haulin' shells if she's fixin' to cough up a lung. Cole, voice muffled by the hull's echo, fingers probing the damage with the tenderness of a lover's regret. Screaming Ellis, but quiet like. Pushed her past the red, she's paying the tab. He worked by touch and beam, the night chill seeping through his fatigues, raising goose flesh on arms scarred from pre-war sparks. A fresh weld here, porous weeping torque fluid, a shim there, twisted from the final sprint's shear. The aircraft throttle linkage, that delicate graft, had warped under vibration, its solenoid coil charred where wire met heat. No explosion, no grenade. Just the insidious creep of fatigue, metal remembering every rev, every dodge. Ray's hands, those eternal intermediaries, moved with ritual slowness, a twist of fresh baling wire to brace the universals, diesel-flushed lines to clear the sludge, a prayer and grease to the bearings. But doubt gnawed, a rat in the walls. Factoried last, he admitted, the irony bitter as burnt valves. I made her fast, made her fragile. Dawn crept reluctant, gray fingers prying at the east as the platoon stirred to life. Bowser trucks rumbled in, hoses snaking like pythons to quench the thirst. Engineers in olive drab swarmed the wrecks, oxy torches hissing blue judgment on the dead. Colonel Hayes arrived in his half-track, pipe unlit, maps under arm, his XO trailing with a field phone that dangled like a noose. The brass circled the mule like pilgrims at a shrine, thumbs tracing the underbelly welds, eyes widening at the jury-rigged guts. Hayes, squatting, voice a rumble of cigars and command, prodding a gear tooth with his swagger stick. "Cole, you magnificent bastard. Saved the push. Intel says that gap's holding. Fritz in full route. Ordnance wants diagrams. Detroit'll want your scalp. How's she running?" Ray straightened, wiping palms on trousers stiff with crud, the morning light unforgiving on his hollows. Cole, meeting the colonel's gaze, words measured like rounds in the chamber. "Runnin', sir, but limpin'. Gave her all she had. Reckon she gave more'n she should." Hayes nodded, the pipe stem bobbing, a flicker of something paternal in the squint. "Hayes, wars are won on limps, son. Patch her. We're rollin' 0800. Avranche by noon, or bust." He clapped Ray's shoulder, turning to Daniels with orders barked like buckshot. But the XO lingered, sketching hasty notes on a pad, the pencil scritch a counterpoint to the awakening engines. The crew refueled her grudgingly, the pumps chug-chug echoing hollow. Kowalski nursed the starter, the engine hacking to life with a backfire that scattered crows from the hedgerows. Revs climbed, sluggish now, the tack lagging like a sprinter with a stitch, but she moved, lurching from the draw with a clank that spoke of compromises. The column reformed, the mule slotted mid-pack this time, her speed capped by Daniel's wary throttle. The plane unspooled under treads, mile after mile of liberated earth, abandoned panzers gutted by Jebos, the air alive with the buzz of recon pipers. By 1000, Avranches hove into view, port town perched on cliffs, its quays choked with supply dumps, the sea beyond a slate-blue promise. But the strain crested on the outskirts, a deceptively gentle rise to the coastal road. Orders, double time to secure the bridgehead, cut off the 353rd Infantry Division's flank. The mule took point again, habit and hubris, Kowalski feeding revs under Ray's murmured guidance. She pulled 28 miles per hour, straining for 30, the whine building to a keen that pierced the helmet pads. Heat cascaded anew, gauges spiking. Oil at 240, coolant bubbling like a witch's brew. Ray felt it first, a harmonic shudder through the turret ring, the mounts vibrating loose from the day's cumulative abuse. Cole, over intercom, voice edged with the calm of inevitability. "Ease off, kid, she's winded. Don't flog her." Too late. The countershaft let go with a crack. Not explosion, but fracture, the lightened gear sheared clean by the torque's accumulated grudge. The transmission locked, tracks seizing in a spray of metal confetti, the mule slewing broadside across the road like a drunkard felled. Smoke billowed, not blue victory but gray defeat, from the vents, the acrid reek of scorched bearings flooding the cabin. Alarms wailed, red lights strobing like accusatory eyes. Kowalski fought the brakes, the hull grinding to a halt amid a divot of churned turf. The column piled up astern, horns blaring futile protest, but no fire, no brew-up, just the indignity of stillness. Daniels popped hatches, the crew bailing into the sun's glare, faces ashen. Engineers swarmed, Hale at the fore with his kit, his earlier skepticism curdled to grim vindication. Hale, prying the pan, voice thick with the tobacco of told you so. "Told you, Cole. Pushed the envelope till it tore. She's stripped, shaft spaghetti, universal's toast. Tow her back, she's done." Ray stood apart, hands in pockets, watching the dissection. The mule lay eviscerated, her belly splayed under the hoist, guts gleaming accusatory in the light. Broke her to save us, he thought, the junkyard wisdom turning knife twist. But we lived the day. Ellis sidled up, flask in hand, offering without words. Ray took a pull, the burn chasing the hollow. Daniels joined, silent too, the three a tripod of quiet reckoning amid the bustle. By noon, she was lashed to a wrecker, trundling rearward to the field depot. A fallen steed for the surgeons. The platoon pressed on without her, Stock Shermans plodding the road, Victory's glow dimmed by the gap. Ray rode the half-track, tools clinking like regrets, the wind whipping his collar. Avranches fell intact, the sea's salt a balm on raw nerves, but his mind lingered on the roar silenced, the speed spent. Sometimes to go farther, something has to break. Legacy isn't etched in marble, it's forged in the quiet aftermath, when the roar fades and the scars tell the tale. August 1944 saw the fruits of Cobra's bite. Avranches secured, the Falaise pocket closing like a vice on 50,000 Germans, the road to Paris a ribbon of retribution. Ray Cole's platoon pressed on without the Mule, Stock Shermans plodding the liberation's path, their engines a dirge for the swift sister lost. She arrived at the 3rd Armored's field depot near Mortagne, lashed to the wrecker like a fallen colossus, her hull a canvas of gouges and glory. Ordnance teams swarmed her under canvas tents that smelled of canvas duck and diesel, lanterns swaying like pendulums over the dissection. Warrant Officer Hale, clipboard trembling in the chill, led the autopsy. Transmission pan pried wide, the sheared countershaft extracted like a spent casing. Jeep gears laid out on oilcloth for judgment. Hale, muttering to his assistant, a young tech sergeant with ink-fresh stripes, his voice a gravel whisper in the lamplight. Look at this mess. Aluminum in a steel symphony. Cole's madness. But damn if it didn't sing till it snapped. The report ascended the chain in triplicate. Anomalous field modification, non-standard driveline enhancements. Operational efficacy observed exceeding design parameters by 45% in velocity at cost of structural integrity. Colonel Hayes attached a commendation rider. Hayes inked flourish on the cover sheet. Corporal Cole's initiative saved lives. Recommend review for meritorious service. But bureaucracy, that eternal antagonist, ground slow. The Mule was stripped, not for salvage but study. Her guts crated to Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland, where the Army's mechanical priesthood dissected her in sterile bays, micrometers tracing the heresy of welds and wires. Ray? He rode the wave of whispers, transferred to a recovery unit, wrenching wrecks by day, racing ghosts by night. No Purple Heart for engines, but a quiet promotion to sergeant, and Daniel's flask shared under stars that still smelled of cordite. The war's end found Ray in the Ruhr, May 1945. Berlin's rubble a junkyard writ large, V2 husks mated to half-tracks in futile Frankenstein. He shipped home on a Liberty crammed with hollow-cheeked victors. The Mule's echo a vibration in his palms he couldn't wash away. Detroit welcomed him not with parades but the familiar clang of his father's yard. Fords and Chevys piled like battlefield dead, the air thick with the burnt oil perfume of second chances. Ray bought in, a corner lot off Joy Road, tools racked like rifles, where he rebuilt hot rods for the boys who'd made it back, each supercharger whine a nod to Normandy's nights. Speed's survival, he'd say to wide-eyed apprentices, wiping hands on rags that never lightened. But don't forget the brake. Decades turned like lazy camshafts. The 1960s brought Vietnam's thunder, but Ray stayed stateside, his grease-blackened fingers tracing blueprints for Detroit's muscle era. Pontiac GTOs with hearts borrowed from the R975's, kin. He married late, a nurse named Lena, freckled like Ellis but steady as Daniels, who bore him 2 boys with his sharp jaw and her quiet fire. The Mule? She lingered in footnotes, a 1952 Ordnance Board memo, yellowed and archived. Coal modification viable for extreme terrain, risks exceed benefits under standard ops. But whispers persisted in vet halls, where old tankers swapped yarns over watered whiskey. The Mule mythologized as the hedgerow ghost, the Sherman that outran Rommel's revenge. It resurfaced in 1978 during the Army's armored retrospective at Fort Knox, Kentucky's rolling hills a pale echo of bocage, gold bullion vaults guarding secrets heavier than steel. A curator from the Patton Museum, Dr. Elias Thorne, unearthed the crate in a sub-basement. Dust motes dancing in the beam like tracer ghosts. Thorne, bespectacled and bookish, with hands soft as unread field manuals, pored over the relics. The scarred countershaft, wire universals coiled like rusted springs, the aircraft solenoid etched with Ray's initials RC-44, a tattoo on titanium. "This isn't engineering," he murmured to his grad student, a lanky vet named Harlan with a prosthetic leg from Kasan. "It's poetry, defiance distilled." They rebuilt her, not whole but homage, a donor Sherman chassis mated to the salvaged heart, welds retraced with modern torches that spat blue-white reverence. Ray, 60 now, grizzled and broad, received the invitation by certified mail, yellowed envelope smelling of mimeograph ink. He drove down in his '68 Charger, Lena beside him, the V8's rumble a baseline to his silence. Fort Knox's proving grounds shimmered under July sun, the restored Mule squatting under camouflage netting, her hull polished to a patina that caught the light like memory. A crowd gathered, brass hats, historians, a smattering of Third Armored survivors. Daniels among them, cane in hand, mustache snow-white but eyes sharp. Thorne led the unveiling, voice amplified over the PA's tinny crackle. Thorne, gentlemen, and the lady who kept this madman fed. Today we honor not a tank but a truth, that wars are won not by factories alone, but by the hands that refuse their limits. The Mule didn't just run, she raced. And in her, we see the unyielding spark of American grit. The netting dropped, the Mule gleaming defiant. Ray approached slow, boots crunching gravel like bocage roots, his palm pressing the glacis where shrapnel scars still whispered. The touch ignited it, the vibration, faint through modern mounts, but there, the ghost rev of unchained radials. Daniels hobbled up, clapping his shoulder with the old force. Daniels, voice gravel over the crowd's murmur, eyes misting like rain on oil. Grease hands, she's beautiful, owe you that scotch still. Make it a case. Ellis's boy, now a major, freckles faded but grin intact, stood proxy, sharing a flask passed down. Major Ellis, Dad said you flew her, Uncle Ray. Said she outran hell itself. Laughter rippled, warm as engine block heat, but Ray's gaze lingered on the plaque. Brass tag riveted to the turret bustle, letters punched deep, the Mule. It ran when nothing else did. He never bragged. When Thorne pressed for the lecture, spotlights hot, mics humming like governors, Ray leaned into the stand, voice rough as unsanded weld. Cole, a machine's like a man, it just needs a reason to run. Factory specs, they're for peacetime. War, you listen, you feel the whine before the break, the pull before the push. The Mule, she wasn't junkyard luck. She was us, stubborn, scarred, but alive 'cause we wouldn't let her quit. The crowd stilled, the words hanging like exhaust in still air. Harlan, the vet student, scribbled furious, instinct over ordnance, improvisation as doctrine. Later, in the archive's hush, Thorne etched it into the exhibit card. See Corporal Raymond Cole's Junkyard Fix, a testament to frontline genius, where desperation birthed velocity, saving lives when blueprints bled. The Mule rolled out for demos. Slow laps on the range, her revs capped now, but the crowd felt the echo, that forbidden surge. Kids pressed noses to the viewing ropes, dreaming of hot rods. Old tankers nodded, sharing drags on luckies that tasted of 44. Ray drove home under harvest moon, Lena's hand on his knee, the Charger's headlights carving tunnels through the dark. Proud? She asked, voice soft as carburetor silk. He glanced rearward, where the empty trailer swayed. Proud, he thought. Of the break, or the run? Just glad she ran when it counted, he said. The boys grew, one to engines like his, the other to books like Thorne's. Ray's yard thrived, 70s oil crises be damned, each rebuild a ritual, wires twisted with the precision of memory. By 1994, Ray's hands slowed, arthritis knotting knuckles like seized universals. He passed quiet in his sleep, Lena beside, the radio tuned to big band echoes. The obituary ran small. Raymond Cole, 76, Detroit mechanic, WU2 vet, innovator of the legendary Mule Sherman. But at Knox, the exhibit bloomed. Interactive kiosks hummed with schematics, click for the governor bypass, drag to simulate the flank at Tessie. School groups filed through, teachers intoning, see? One man's wrench turned the tide. Harlan, now curator, added the plaque's twin. Courage isn't built in factories, it's welded in the field. The Mule endures, oiled and vigilant in her glass case, a relic that whispers to those who listen. In the whine of modern Abrams turbines, the hybrid hum of electric drivetrains, you hear her. The junkyard fix that outran fear. Ray's words echo through time, a gear tooth in eternity. A machine's like a man, it just needs a reason to run. Wars change, but the lesson spins eternal. Innovation is desperation done right, courage a throttle wide open. They mocked his fix until it outran their fear. If you believe real innovation deserves remembrance, subscribe for more Untold WU2 legends.